everyone, and welcome to Martin's Home and Garden's YouTube channel. This week, we're actually going to be doing a how-to or instructional video where we are going to repot an orchid. This week, we got a little bit behind on our House Plant of the Week video, so instead we're going to give y'all a little something spicier, a little something extra that's a little bit different than what we usually do. So this week, we're going to be showing everybody how to do what is probably the most intimidating part of owning an orchid, which would be repotting it. So people often bring their orchids to me, and they're great orchid owners. If you keep your orchid happy for long enough to notice that it needs to be repotted, then you're obviously doing something right. So you could probably repot it yourself. Now, if you want a professional to do it, that is totally fine and understandable, and I love repotting orchids. But this is an easy thing. It's really not as scary as it seems, and it's a fun little thing to know how to do. So let's kind of get into the ways to know if your orchid needs to be repotted or not. So the first step in determining if your orchid needs to be repotted is that generally every year to 2 years, you're going to want to repot your orchid. The nutrients in the soil deplete. So it's really important to know whether or not you need to do so. It's also important because you have to keep an eye out for what the roots are kind of telling you. So if the roots are all running out of the pot, growing all crazy, then that's a good sign that you do need to repot your orchids. Another little trick you can do is to smell the potting medium, which sounds crazy, but sometimes you can tell that it needs to be repotted if the orchid potting medium starts to smell just kind of funky. That can also breed different fungus in the roots and stuff like that. So it is important to keep an eye out for it. There isn't really a specific time of year that you need to repot your orchid. They're not really picky about that. However, you do want to make sure that they're in their rest period. So once they're done blooming before the next one, that's when I would repot my orchids. My orchid blooms at really random times throughout the year. I've got them all blooming at different times. I have a few different types, and they just like to bloom whenever they feel like it. So what I just kind of tell people is to repot your orchid when it's in its rest period, and then that'll give it plenty of nutrients. It's not stressed trying to create another bloom, and it'll just really make your orchid really happy. So let's get into the steps on how to pot your orchid. So the first thing you want to do is remove any of the excess little things in your orchid. Sometimes when you buy them from like Kroger or Walmart, places like that, they'll come with all these little gimmicky things. Sometimes they'll come with little hearts in it. And pretty much always orchids come with some kind of stake, because if they were blooming, at one point the orchid stalk was probably growing along the stake here. So take the stake out, and then make sure you take your tags and things out. And then I like to take the orchid out of the pot at this point. So what you see here is that orchid mix is really, it's really airy. It's basically just bark. So it fell off of the roots super simply and very easy. So this is actually a rehab orchid of ours, which is why I'm repotting it for everyone here today. But I did soak it before I wanted to repot it, just so some of that soil might stay on the roots. As you can see, that did not happen, but this is what the orchid bark looks like. It's just straight bark chips and a little bit of perlite. Now, this is what it came from in the nursery. The orchid mix that we're using today is by Espelma, so it's a little bit different. It's got a bit chunkier pieces. But really any orchid specific potting medium is what you're going to want. But you can't use standard potting soil for orchids because they do have these aerial roots that really like to be exposed to air, which is why the pots have these little holes in them. So this is kind of intimidating. Lots of people would prefer to keep it in the type of pot where you just set it right down in there, and you can soak it in that same pot. So you have like a liner pot, and then you have a pot with no drainage holes. And that is fine. That does work. I have one like that at my house. But this also is really happy for the plant because it is an epiphytic plant that grows on the side of trees and things, so it really likes for its roots to have access to lots of air. Now that we've got our plants out of the pot, what you're going to want to do is go through and trim off any dead roots. So I've got my sanitized scissors here. And with orchids, it's nice to have a really thin pair of scissors because you can kind of get in there, especially if, if this plant was a really happy orchid and it had a ton of roots, you'd want to be really specific about what root that you do cut. So going through and just cutting off any dead material. You can kind of see that there is dead material. It's kind of hollow. So doing something like that is really crucial. You also will find like other little shriveled up pieces. So just giving those a little fresh cut is nice. You don't want to do too much just to make sure that you're not going to get any kind of root rot or fungus from the parts of the roots that aren't happy. So now that I've removed my dead pieces, anytime I make a fresh cut on a root, I do like to do something to protect the roots. This could be dusting with cinnamon, if you want to use something that you just have in your pantry, or you could just spray it a little bit with some neem oil. Today I'm just going to spray a little bit with neem oil just to make sure that the leaves as well as the roots don't get any kind of yuckiness on them. You can also use a little bit of a rooting hormone just to make sure that, the roots are going to be really happy. Rooting hormone naturally occurs in the plant. Auxin is actually the name of the hormone that is naturally occurring, which is what is used in rooting hormone. So it just promotes root growth, and so it's a really good thing to use. 2 seconds. Dang it. I don't know where my neem oil is. Oh, goodness. Okay, everyone, apologies. We are back. We had some production technical difficulties. My neem oil came up missing, but that happens a lot when you're at a garden center. Anyways, so what we're going to be doing is spraying our neem oil on the plant just as a preventative measure. Sorry, I'll try to talk better. So what we just do is I just do like a little light misting of neem oil right here, just to make sure that we're getting all angles of the plant so that no bugs can live on it and it's going to be happy. No fungus either. So we'll put that to the side. You can get yourself a bottle of neem oil and maybe buy 2 so that nobody takes it. If you wanted to use rooting hormone, that is an option. We sell it here. It's not very expensive, and it's a really good thing to just have handy if you're a pretty avid gardener. So what I do after I spray my neem oil is I take my healthy, happy, trimmed plant, and I kind of figure out where I'm going to want to have it in my pot, and I kind of see how much space I have in the pot based on where the roots are. So with these pots where we're not going up too much and there's a lot of space in there for potting medium, I like to take, just little handfuls and kind of work them in around the roots. So what I'm doing here is I'm just working it in. Now you'll see that stuff will start to fall out. And as I get more and more of the medium in here, I'll start taking bigger pieces of the soil and putting them in front of the holes. It doesn't necessarily block anything from being able to get air because they are such porous pieces of bark. And they're chunky, so there's not really any room for things to get blocked in there. So I just throw in little pieces of bark every now and then. And then I just continue to fill in around the roots to, provide stability for the orchid. You can see that this mixture is really airy, really nice, and, So once we've done all of this, it's important to kind of know how you're going to want to stake your orchid to provide an area for the rootstock to grow up. If you have an orchid that has a current rootstock that just got done flowering, you also will want to cut that down by the node to kind of signify to your orchid that it can go ahead and send up another stalk. Or at least that's what, you know, I like for my orchids to bloom. So if you don't like your orchids to bloom, then you might not want to do that. But I think that's the point, and that's what most people like. So once you've got it all set up in here and you're looking nice, it's important to think about how you're going to water. So with these, you can't really soak them. So making sure that you keep, you know, your routine schedule of watering is pretty important, and knowing kind of how you're going to water. In this situation, I would probably mist pretty often and then fully, you know, like run water all the way through it, but then give it a space where it can dry out. And then you'll want to return all of your little pieces into your potting medium. This little stake is really just for looks right now because there isn't a bloom stalk on this little rehab guy. We've got our little clip for when he does sprout a new stalk, and then I always return the tag. So with orchids, it's really nice to know exactly what kind of bloom you're going to have and what color it's going to be. So I like to make sure that I have everything marked and pretty. And once that's all done, you have a really beautiful repotted orchid. This is really more important to do if your orchid has more roots than this one had. This one is just a little bit stressed out, so I wanted to give it the love and TLC that it needed. If you have a plant that is in good soil, good potting medium, maybe you just bought it and you need to repot it. You can leave some of the original potting medium in there and mix it about half and half with the new stuff. That way you make sure that you don't stress it out anymore from transferring from the nursery back to here or back to your home. Make sure that when you're done potting, you put it in the same spot it was in before so that it doesn't get stressed out, and just keep loving your orchid like you do. So thank you all for checking in. Sorry about our technical difficulties, and we hope to see you soon.